The first sound in the house wasn't wind. It was a thud, soft, deliberate, and wrong. Jack Whittaker froze halfway down the creaking hallway, his gloved fingers tightening around the flashlight. Outside, the January wind clawed at the cottonwoods. Inside, the stone house breathed like something alive. His boots crunched on dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades, or so the county clerk said. Beside him, Ranger, the German shepherd who'd followed him through mortar smoke, deserts, and empty airports, stood rigid. His ears pointed forward, tail stiff, nose twitching in sharp bursts. Jack didn't need anyone to tell him what that meant. Someone, or something, was already inside. He cut the light. The darkness was immediate and total, swallowing the edges of the world. Ranger pressed closer to his leg, a steady, warm weight. Jack could hear his own heartbeat, a hammer against the cold. The thud didn't come again, but the silence that followed felt engineered. 2 hours earlier, Jack had signed the papers. The county annex building smelled like burnt coffee and paper. An auctioneer with a tired football coach voice called out, "Parcel 4127, Stone Residence, minimum bid, 50 cents. A few locals shifted in their chairs. No one raised a card. Jack did. The gavel came down with a sound like a locked door. It wasn't supposed to be a story. It was supposed to be a place to start over. Somewhere nobody asked about the missing years, the scars, or why his dog slept with one eye open. 50 cents and some transfer fees later, he walked out of the building with a brass key taped to an envelope and a clerk who whispered, "You can still walk away." But he didn't. The truck ride to Coldwater was long and grey. Ranger kept his head out the window, nose working at the clean mountain air like he'd never breathe enough of it. Snow gathered in the grass along the foothills, where rusted fence lines leaned but never quite gave in. When the stone house appeared, Jack downshifted automatically, as if the building itself commanded it. The house stood back from the road, 2 stories of pale grey rock fitted unevenly, like a jaw that had been broken and healed wrong. Shuttered windows, a sagging porch roof, the front steps veined with moss. No birds, no cars, just the sound of wind threading through empty places. Jack killed the engine. For a long moment, neither he nor Ranger moved. It wasn't fear exactly, more like recognition. This place remembered things. "Come on," Jack muttered. The front door resisted, then gave with a sigh. The air inside was stale, sharp, like paper gone brittle. Ranger padded forward, nose low, claws ticking against the old floorboards. Jack swept the flashlight across the foyer. Staircase curving upward, fireplace yawning black in the living room, layers of dust on everything, but not as thick as they should have been. Something, or someone, had been here in the last decade. Jack walked room to room. Kitchen frozen in avocado green appliances straight out of the 70s. A cracked coffee mug on the counter. A 2012 calendar magnet still stuck to the fridge. Upstairs could wait. He unrolled a sleeping bag near the hearth. Ranger circled once, then lay down, facing the hallway. Not the fire, never the fire. Jack loosened his jacket, but didn't take off his boots. Combat habits died slower than men. Night bled through the trees in quiet layers. Coldwater after dark wasn't noisy like cities. It was the kind of silence that listened back. Ranger lifted his head first. That low growl, deep in his chest, vibrating through the air, was a sound Jack had learned to trust more than human language. He sat up slowly, scanning the edges of the room. The old beams creaked. The house didn't. The growl sharpened, focused. Jack switched off the flashlight. The thud came again. Closer this time. From the east wall. He stood, weight balanced on the balls of his feet, flashlight gripped like a weapon. Ranger crept toward the wall, fur bristling. There was no visible door, no crawl space, just plaster and stone. but the dog pressed his nose to it like there was a heartbeat on the other side. Jack's pulse slowed to that old rhythm, the one from convoys in Afghanistan, when the world shrank to what you could hear, smell, and kill if you had to. He didn't speak. Ranger didn't bark. They just listened. The wind outside gusted. The trees groaned. Inside the house, something shifted behind that wall. Just a scrape, a breath of stone. But it was enough. Jack backed up a step, flashlight trained. Nothing. But the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was watching. The next morning came pale and slow. Jack didn't sleep. Ranger didn't either. The first thing Jack noticed wasn't the frost on the windows. It was the fact that the 50-cent coin, the one the clerk had taped to his paperwork for luck, wasn't on the floor where he'd left it. It was on the mantel. He fed Ranger, poured black coffee from a thermos, and sat on the creaky steps of the porch. The house loomed behind him. The mailbox sagged like it had been waiting decades for bad news. He'd told himself moving to Coldwater was about breathing room. But breathing room doesn't make walls shift at night. Across the road, an old Ford pickup slowed but didn't stop. The driver didn't wave. Small towns had a way of watching without looking. Ranger sat beside him, posture tall, gaze locked on the house. "You feel it too," Jack muttered. The dog didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Back inside, Jack dragged his boots along the eastern wall where Ranger had growled. The plaster was cracked, irregular, almost like it had been patched badly. He crouched, pressed a hand against it. Cold. Too cold for a wall that should have been warming with the morning sun. Ranger paced behind him, nails clicking. A faint, hollow knock echoed back from the other side when Jack rapped the plaster with his knuckles. Not stone, not solid. Something was buried there. He forced himself to step back. Not yet. Don't tear down walls before you know who built them. Instead, Jack walked the perimeter outside. No footprints in the snow, but his own. No new tire tracks. The house, at least on the outside, looked every bit the dead shell the auction sheet promised, but the inside wasn't matching the story. As dusk sank its teeth in again, Jack found himself on the floor of the living room, Ranger stretched against his side, flashlight aimed at the wall. The wind was picking up. The trees leaned and whispered. He could leave. He could pack up and drive away before this place became something heavier than he could carry. But he wouldn't. He'd paid for this house, not with money, but with the promise of a quiet he hadn't had in years. And now the house was promising something else entirely. Ranger's ears flicked. His growl returned, low, steady, unshakable. Jack whispered, "All right, boy. We'll find out what's in there." Outside, the wind screamed like a warning. Inside, the eastern wall held its breath. Some walls aren't meant to divide rooms. They divide truth from lies. The moment Jack's pry bar hit the seam in the wall, something inside him clenched. Not fear, not quite. It was the quiet certainty that once this wall opened, life wouldn't close around him the same way again. Ranger stood to the side, tail still, ears tilted forward in anticipation. He wasn't barking. He didn't need to. The air had changed. The house felt different now, as if it were holding its breath alongside them. The plaster gave under the metal edge with a dry snap. A small cloud of dust choked the beam of Jack's flashlight. He coughed once and kept going, chiseling away layers that cracked like old bone. Behind it, wood, rough, unpainted, old. Jack stopped. A seam, a hidden door. He ran his fingers over the edge, felt where the frame had been set, hastily, sloppily, like whoever built it wasn't trying to keep people out, but to keep something in. He glanced at Ranger. "You ready?" he asked. Ranger didn't move. He just stared at the door. Jack braced himself and pushed. The panel shifted inward with a muffled groan. Cold air rolled out, air that smelled like sealed paper, mildew, and something older. The darkness beyond wasn't empty. It had depth. He aimed the flashlight inside. Steps. Descending. The narrow stairwell was carved directly into the stone, unmarked and silent. Jack hesitated just long enough to grab the backup flashlight from his bag. Ranger moved first, his body sliding into a tense, alert stance, then descended the steps like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Jack followed. The beam swept across a low, rectangular room, carved neatly and intentionally. This wasn't a cellar for pickles or preserves. This was a bunker. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, wooden crates stacked chest-high. A desk sat in the center, dusty but not ruined. The air was thick, but not dead, as if someone had once stood here, paused mid-thought, and planned to return. Jack exhaled slowly. This wasn't a secret room, he murmured. This was an office. He stepped to the desk, brushed off a layer of grime, and opened the nearest drawer. Deeds, handwritten records, signatures, seals from the Coldwater County office, dozens of property transfers, many duplicated, some appearing twice under different names. He opened another drawer. Affidavits, letters, testimonies. And then he froze. A photograph. His father, standing straight-backed in a military uniform, younger than Jack had ever seen him. Beside him, a German shepherd wearing a canine harness. Jack sat down hard on the edge of the desk. Ranger padded closer, nose twitching. He sniffed the photo, then pressed his head gently against Jack's leg, as if he understood the weight of what they were holding. Jack flipped the photo over. Petition, 1984, land case. He swallowed the dry lump in his throat and moved to the string-bound folder tucked beneath a pile of yellowed maps. Inside, typed testimonies from Coldwater residents accusing Ridge's office decades ago of double-selling property deeds. One letter, still unsent, had his father's handwriting on the envelope. Jack unfolded it with care. If I can't stand in court, let my son know the truth. His chest tightened. He hadn't come here looking for legacy. He hadn't come here to inherit a war. But the house, the silence, the wall, the papers, they all whispered the same thing. This wasn't coincidence. This was unfinished business. He took a shaky breath, set the letter aside, and stood. His flashlight swept across the room. He counted 5 filing cabinets, 3 crates, 2 locked metal boxes. This place could bury a man in paper. It could also expose a dynasty. Ranger moved suddenly. He turned, body angled toward the stairs, ears rigid. A low growl built deep in his chest. Jack cut the flashlight. The room fell into total darkness. He waited. Above, something creaked. Not a normal house settling. This was pressure, weight, a deliberate step. Ranger pressed against his leg, gaze fixed upward. Jack stayed crouched, counting his breaths. Whoever was up there, they weren't knocking, they weren't rushing. They were just listening, maybe the same way he was. He waited until the sound passed. Only then did he flip the flashlight back on. The basement's silence returned like a shroud. But the damage was done. Someone had been in the house. Someone still might be. Jack gathered what he could. His father's photo, the unsent letter, a folder of the worst forged deeds, and crept back up the stairs with Ranger at his heels. The main floor looked unchanged. The coin on the mantel was gone again. He didn't ask questions. He didn't speak. He walked the perimeter slowly, checked every window, then pulled down the attic ladder with steady hands. Ranger stayed below, whining softly. The hatch opened with a breath of wood and dust. Jack's light swept the low attic space. Boxes of insulation, crumpled mattress pad, cigarette butts, empty thermos, a wool coat draped across a rafter. He pulled it down, heavy, military cut. Inside the collar, embroidered initials, CR, Calvin Ridge, the current mayor, the same man who signed off on the seized properties, the same name in half the documents downstairs. This wasn't just corruption. This was occupation. The attic hadn't been abandoned. It had been used, actively, recently. Jack climbed back down and locked the hatch. He placed the jacket on the hearth like a body. Ranger sat beside it, eyes locked. Jack didn't speak. There were too many voices in the room already. That night, he barely slept. The wind scraped against the shutters. The silence inside pressed in harder than before. He thought about the photograph, the dog beside his father, the collar Granger had given him, the files below. This wasn't about property anymore. It was about memory. Who remembered, who erased, and who carried what forward? Ranger rested his head on Jack's boot. For a long time, they didn't move. Outside, the house held its breath again. But Jack knew what came next. He had names. He needed help. In the morning, he drove into Coldwater with the file on the passenger seat. Ranger watched the town roll past. Jack rehearsed how he'd approach the clerk's office, but when he walked through the front door, the woman behind the counter didn't smile this time. She glanced at the folder, then at Jack. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, voice tight. "We can't accept those documents here. You'll need to go through the county attorney." Jack frowned. "Why?" She hesitated, then whispered, "They'll send you away." Outside, the town looked the same, but the way people looked at him had changed. At the diner, a man with an apron blocked the entrance. "We're not serving today," he said flatly. Jack looked down at Ranger. The dog stared back, calm, unreadable. He didn't fight. Not yet. But Coldwater had picked its side, and Jack wasn't on it. In the parking lot, he opened the glove box and stared at the files again. He needed someone who still believed in the truth, someone who wasn't afraid to print it. Ranger shifted in the seat, nose pressed to the glass. The wind carried the faintest hint of snow. Jack picked up his phone, found a name he hadn't thought of in years. Lauren Hale. She once wrote about soldiers like they weren't headlines. Maybe she'd still remember how to listen. Ranger huffed softly and curled into the seat. The house had shown him the past. Now he had to decide what to do with it. The attic isn't haunted, but it's definitely not empty. Jack stood under the attic hatch, staring up at it like it might breathe. The air in the stone house was colder tonight. Still, even Ranger felt it, his ears back, his body tight as a coiled spring. He hadn't barked in hours, but his nose kept tilting toward the ceiling. Something was up there. Jack was sure of it now. He gripped the attic ladder with both hands and pulled. The hinges moaned like an old man in pain. Dust filtered down. Jack stepped back as the rickety wooden ladder unfolded toward him. He clicked off the main flashlight and flicked on a small pen light, less visible from the outside. Ranger stayed at the base, unmoving. Jack looked down at him. "If I'm not back in 5, raise hell." Ranger gave a low, almost imperceptible whuff, his amber eyes never leaving the opening above. Jack climbed slow. Each rung creaked, and each one felt like it echoed too loud. When he reached the top, he paused, a breath. Then he pushed the hatch up. Stale air poured over him, carrying dust, smoke, and something faint, like aftershave and old wool. He swept the beam left to right. The attic was long and low-ceilinged, the floorboards covered in collapsed insulation and debris. But in the center of the space was a clearing, deliberate. Someone had cleared it. A foam sleeping pad, empty water bottles, a cigarette pack, and, hanging neatly over one of the rafters, a coat. Jack crawled up, careful not to disturb more than necessary. The beam of his flashlight paused on the coat. It was thick, military cut, deep grey wool. He reached for it with slow, steady fingers, knowing what he'd find even before he turned the collar. Initials stitched in faded gold thread. CR, Calvin Ridge. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The mayor's coat. The bastard had been living here, watching, listening. The attic wasn't haunted, but it was definitely not empty. This wasn't just a scare tactic. This was surveillance, obsession. Maybe something more dangerous than either. He turned the beam toward a pile of cigarette butts collected in an old mug. Some were still fresh, the ash not yet fully broken down. One had a smudge of lipstick on the filter. Jack's jaw tightened. He swept the light again. In the corner sat a battered thermos. Next to it, a matchbook from a diner off Main Street, the same one that had turned him away. Jack crouched lower, eyeing footprints in the dust. Heavy boots, fresh. They led toward the small attic window overlooking the front yard. From here, whoever lived in this attic could see everything: the mailbox, the porch, the road beyond. He looked back at the coat. This wasn't Calvin Ridge's hiding place, it was his perch. Jack scooped the coat under one arm and began to crawl back toward the hatch. As he reached the edge, he heard the faintest noise from the house below, a single knock, or a creak impossible to place. He froze, waited, then descended, slow, each rung under tension. Ranger was at the bottom, eyes locked on him. When Jack stepped off the ladder, the dog moved forward and sniffed the coat. His body stiffened. Then a growl, low, deep, not fear, recognition. Jack folded the coat carefully and laid it across the stone hearth like an offering. Ranger sat directly in front of it, watching, guarding. Jack didn't speak for a long time. He didn't have words yet. All he had was fire, not the kind you set, the kind that simmers. The next morning he made calls. None of them answered. County clerk, assessor's office, even the sheriff's station. Just static or forced politeness. People weren't just afraid of Ridge, they were conditioned. So Jack went with the only option left, the one he'd been trying to avoid. He emailed Lauren Hale, former war reporter, now working regional pieces out of Denver. She'd once written an honest article about his unit during a deployment ceremony. Not romantic, not condescending, just true. He didn't include much in the message, just, need a story told, one that could get people hurt. I have proof. You trust dogs? She replied 6 hours later. I trust what they know. I'm driving in tomorrow. That night, the air in the stone house turned sharp. Jack bolted awake near midnight, heart hammering. Ranger was already standing, tail stiff, body pressed toward the back of the house. Jack rose quietly, hand on the flashlight, the other near the bat he'd propped by the door. The power had flickered twice earlier. He didn't trust the grid anymore. They moved through the hallway like ghosts. Ranger led, every muscle tense. At the meter box outside, they found the wires cleanly cut, not chewed, not corroded, cut. The ends of the copper curled like ribbons. But what chilled Jack more were the smudges on the siding, faint fingerprints in dark streaks. Someone had stood here, hands braced against the wall, watching, waiting. Jack whispered, "They're not just warning us." Ranger growled low, then turned back toward the tree line, where snow covered the ground like a veil. In the faint moonlight, Jack saw them, boot prints, too deep for melting snow, too fresh for old tracks. They led from the woods to the back door, and nowhere else. Whoever it was had come close, real close. Jack stood in the yard for a long time, rifle in hand, staring into the trees. The stone house wasn't just under pressure anymore. It was under siege. In the morning, Lauren Hale arrived in a salt-stained Subaru. Jack met her at the gate. She stepped out, tall and calm, coat flapping in the wind. Her hair was tied back. Her boots looked worn, but solid. She didn't extend her hand, just nodded toward Ranger. "He's bigger than I expected," Jack said. "He usually is." Lauren crouched, palm out. Ranger approached, slow, sniffed once, then sat. Approval. "I'm here now," she said. "Let's see what they buried." Jack led her inside, past the hearth, where Ridge's coat still lay. Lauren paused. She didn't touch it, but she studied it like it might explain everything. Then she looked at Jack. "You understand what this means, right?" He nodded once. "It's not just corruption. It's trespass, on every level." She looked down at Ranger, then back at him. "And you're ready to fight this?" Jack glanced at the stairs leading to the attic, then down the hallway to the wall that used to be solid. "To the end," he said. That night, the three of them sat around the old kitchen table, Jack, Lauren, and Ranger at their feet. Outside, the wind picked up again, but inside, something shifted. The silence no longer pressed. It listened. It waited. In Coldwater, silence isn't fear, it's compliance. The first time Jack saw the town flinch was at the gas station. Lauren had gone inside to grab coffee. He stayed outside to top off the tank, Ranger pacing around the edge of the lot with his usual slow, deliberate gait, head up, ears twitching. The air was crisp, early sun hanging low behind the cottonwoods. Everything seemed normal until the pump clicked off and Jack turned to see two men in flannel standing near the newspaper rack, watching them. One muttered something under his breath. The other one didn't even blink, just shook his head, turned, and disappeared around the corner like he'd seen enough. Jack looked down at Ranger. The dog had stopped moving, posture alert. "What did you smell?" Jack murmured. Ranger's nose twitched once, then settled. Inside the shop, Lauren stood at the counter, clutching a paper cup, while the teenage clerk stared at her like she was carrying a live grenade. She said something polite. He didn't respond. When she came back out, her hands were shaking slightly. "They're not scared of us," she said. "They're scared of being seen with us." Jack nodded. "It's already started." At the Coldwater County Clerk's office, the reception was worse. The same woman who'd handed Jack his key with a soft smile now wouldn't meet his eyes. When he placed the folder of forged deeds on the counter, she stepped back, like it might bite her. "I need these entered into public record," Jack said, calm but direct. "They're tied to Ridge. I have copies of the originals in my truck if you want to verify." She shook her head. "You'll need to take those to the county attorney's office." "That's here, isn't it?" "It is," she said quietly. "But they're unavailable." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Unavailable or instructed?" She blinked, then looked down at the desk like she didn't hear him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker." He leaned in just enough for her to feel the weight of the silence between them. "You know what's in that folder, you know, and you're going to pretend you didn't see it." She whispered, "You shouldn't stay here." Jack took the folder, turned without a word, and walked out. Ranger was already at the door, watching. They stopped by the bank next. Jack asked to speak to a loan officer. A young man with a well-ironed shirt and terrified eyes walked them to a glass-walled desk and sat stiffly. He kept glancing at Ranger as if the dog might lunge across the room. "I received a notice," Jack said, sliding the paper across. "Late fees, administrative processing, $2,000 due. I paid every fee the county requested at auction. I want to know why this is happening now." The man adjusted his glasses, tapped his keyboard for several seconds, then looked up. "The charges are standard for properties acquired through foreclosure transfer, special category processing." Jack stared. "What's the special category?" I can't access the note field." "You mean someone put a lock on my record? I can print the summary. I want to talk to whoever added that flag." "I'm sorry," the man said. "You'll need to submit a written request." Jack leaned back slowly. Ranger's breathing was the only sound in the room. The man looked at the dog and lowered his voice. "You should pay it. People around here don't like things getting complicated." They left without paying. Lauren didn't speak until they were back in the truck, halfway down Main Street. Then, "This isn't just fear. This is systemic, like they've all been taught. If you fight back, you disappear." Jack gritted his teeth. "In cold water, silence isn't fear, it's compliance," she nodded. "And they've been compliant a long damn time." They decided to test one last place, the diner. Jack had eaten there once when he first arrived in town. Greasy eggs, weak coffee, but familiar comfort. He parked across the street and waited. Ranger watched the door, tail twitching. Inside, the bell jingled above them. 3 heads turned. All 3 looked away just as fast. The waitress behind the counter was wiping a clean table. When Jack stepped forward, she stiffened. "Booth for 2, he said. The owner came out from the kitchen, a large man in his 60s, bald with a permanent frown. He wiped his hands on a towel and stepped between Jack and the counter. "We're closed." Jack looked at the clock. "Says you open till noon." "Sign's wrong." "You don't serve coffee anymore?" "Not to people who bring dogs in here." Jack's voice dropped. "He's a trained K9, protected under federal law." The man didn't flinch. He picked up a broom from beside the door and set the bristles gently on the tile in front of Ranger's paws. He didn't swing it, just held it. Ranger stared him down without blinking. Jack's hand balled into a fist. Lauren placed hers on his forearm. "Not worth it," she said quietly. Jack nodded, took one slow step back, then another. As they exited, a mother walking her son on the sidewalk crossed the street to avoid them. The boy pointed at Ranger. The mother pulled him along, whispering something neither of them could hear, but they both knew what it meant. Back at the house, Jack checked the mailbox. A fresh envelope. Return address, Coldwater Community Bank. Inside, an updated notice. New fees added, now totaling nearly $2,800. Due in 21 days. "Jesus," Lauren muttered, reading over his shoulder. Jack crumpled the letter, then smoothed it back out and laid it on the table. "They're not even subtle." Ranger pressed his nose to Jack's hand, the old signal. "Breathe." "Stay present," Jack whispered. "They want us to run." Lauren nodded. "But we won't." "No," Jack said. "We won't." He looked at Ranger. The dog sat upright now, tail still, watching the front door. Waiting. That night they stayed quiet. No lights. No movement past the living room. Jack stared at the map Lauren had printed from county records. Red dots marked every seized property tied to Ridge. Names, lot numbers, deed discrepancies. They weren't outliers. They were a pattern. Lauren sat cross-legged on the floor, a cup of black coffee going cold beside her. Ranger lay between them, ears twitching every few minutes. Finally, she broke the silence. "We need someone who was here when this started." Jack didn't look up. "There is someone." "Who?" He reached over to the mantel, picked up a photograph in a cracked frame, the one he'd taken from the hidden office downstairs. It showed his father in uniform. Next to him, a younger man. Sheriff's badge pinned to his chest. Eyes sharp, jaw clenched. Tom Granger. Jack stood, slid the photo toward Lauren. "I'm betting he didn't forget." Lauren tilted her head. "Think he'll talk?" "I think he's been waiting to." Jack looked at Ranger. "We all carry something we weren't supposed to inherit." Ranger didn't move. He just stared at the photo, and the silence in the house turned thoughtful. Not afraid. Not anymore. Some truths don't fade with time. They just wait for someone brave enough to ask again. Tom Granger didn't answer the door with a smile. He answered it with a loaded shotgun in one hand and a tired look in his eyes. "You Whitaker's boy?" he asked, his voice coarse as gravel and twice as heavy. Jack stood steady. "I am." Granger's gaze dropped to Ranger, who sat at Jack's side like a silent soldier. The old man's eyes flicked once with something too quick to name, recognition maybe, or guilt. "I figured you'd show up eventually," he said. "Come in!" The door groaned open. Lauren gave Jack a sharp look before stepping inside, clutching her recorder tight beneath her coat. Jack followed, Ranger trailing just behind. The house smelled like pine cleaner and old tobacco. Pictures lined the walls, black and white patrol photos, commendation plaques, a faded newspaper clipping about a factory fire rescue. The past, stacked like insulation, thick and suffocating. Granger set the shotgun gently in the corner. He poured 3 cups of coffee, handed them out without asking how they took it, and sat down in a recliner that groaned under his frame. "I knew your father," he said. "Knew him well. Too well." Jack stayed quiet. Sometimes silence moved things faster. Granger took a slow sip, eyes never leaving his. "Your dad? He had a way of stepping into things that weren't his business. Thought the truth mattered more than people's comfort. Ridge hated that about him." "So did half the town." Lauren clicked the recorder on and set it on the table between them. The red light blinked softly, steady as a pulse. "Mind if we record?" she asked. Granger glanced at it. "I'm old, not stupid. If you're going to dig this up, do it loud." He leaned forward, cracked his knuckles. "You want the truth?" he said. "Fine, but it ain't clean, and it sure as hell ain't safe." Granger talked for an hour straight. He told them how, in the early 80s, Calvin Ridge had started seizing property on technicalities, errors in paperwork, late tax filings, expired easements, always the same families, always the ones too poor to hire a lawyer or too scared to fight. "He wrapped it all in legalese," Granger said, "but it was theft, legalized theft." "And my father?" Jack asked. Started asking questions, poking around deeds, dates, checking signatures, found patterns, brought it to me. "Did you help him?" "I tried," Granger said quietly, "but Ridge had the council. Saw the assessor, even the judge. Your dad didn't know how deep it went, or maybe he did and didn't care." Jack leaned forward. "Did he tell you what he found? The files?" Granger's eyes narrowed. "The ones in the stone house?" "Yeah. He made a copy. Gave it to me." Jack froze. "Do you still have them?" Granger didn't answer. He stood, walked over to a cabinet, and pulled out a rusted tin box. He dropped it on the coffee table like it weighed 10 pounds. Inside, folders, maps, old photographs, sealed envelopes. "Half of Coldwater's sins are in here," he said. "But I didn't have the guts to do anything with it." Lauren opened one envelope and read silently. Her hands began to tremble. "This is a forged condemnation letter," she said. "It's how Ridge took the Johansson's orchard." Granger nodded. "That family disappeared in 89. Nobody asked why." Jack clenched his fists. "You sat on this for decades." Granger's jaw tightened. "I did. And it's the biggest regret I've got left." Ranger shifted beside Jack, his body tense. Jack glanced at him, then back at Granger. "We're going to publish this," Granger snorted. "You think printing the truth scares Ridge? It doesn't. Not anymore. He owns Coldwater. He's not afraid of headlines." Lauren looked up. "Then what is he afraid of?" Granger took a deep breath. "Proof he can't burn, and people who refuse to stay quiet." Outside, the wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the porch. Granger stood in the doorway as they left, the tin box clutched in Jack's hand. He didn't say goodbye, just looked at Jack one last time and said, "Your dad would have been proud." Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. Back at the stone house, Lauren began scanning and backing up every document in the tin. She handled them like explosives, delicate, lethal if mishandled. Jack laid the originals out on the dining table, organizing them by date. Ranger circled the room once, then settled at the window, eyes on the tree line. "I've seen whistleblower files before," Lauren said, "but nothing like this. This isn't a leak. This is an indictment." Jack nodded, silent. But inside, something was shifting. Not just rage, not even justice. Resolve. His father had tried to take this to the authorities. They'd buried it. Jack wasn't going to ask this time. He was going to force them to look. The next morning, Lauren called an old contact at the Rocky Mountain Dispatch, a senior editor. She didn't say names, just that she had a story about a systemic land grab orchestrated over 3 decades. The voice on the other end was cautious. "Be sure before you go public," he said. "They'll come after you." Lauren looked across the room at Jack, who was setting up motion sensors outside the house. "We already lit the fuse," she said. That night, Jack stood in the basement office again. He ran his fingers across the desk his father used to sit at, the same desk where secrets were stacked like sandbags. He opened a drawer and pulled out the old photo, his father with Sheriff Granger and the dog with eyes like Ranger's. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "You didn't get to finish it, but I will." Upstairs, Ranger barked, once, sharp, loud. Jack moved fast. By the time he hit the hallway, Lauren was already by the window, staring out. Headlights. A car idled across the road, dark sedan. No plates. After a moment it pulled away. Jack stood in the middle of the room, heart pounding slow and hard. "Was that Ridge?" Lauren asked. Jack shook his head. "No, he doesn't waste warnings." "So what was that?" He looked at Ranger, whose body was still tight with tension. "A scout." They didn't sleep much. Jack stayed on the couch, boots on, rifle leaning beside the fireplace. Ranger lay at the door, eyes open all night. The house didn't make a sound, neither did the trees, but somewhere, out in the dark, someone was counting down. When they couldn't scare the man, they came for the dog. The knock came just after 2 a.m. Not the polite kind, not even the angry kind. It was the deliberate kind, the kind that didn't wait for an answer, the kind that echoed in your spine before your ears. Jack snapped upright on the couch, hand instantly on the rifle. The fire had burned low, just glowing embers now. Ranger was already up, pressed against the front door, teeth bared, no bark, just a low, vibrating growl that made the floorboards hum. Lauren came out of the hallway, barefoot, eyes wide, breath caught in her chest. "They're not going to knock twice," Jack said. Ranger lunged before the second knock landed. Something metallic clicked outside. Jack shoved the deadbolt into place and moved toward the back of the house. "Window, now!" Lauren grabbed her laptop and flash drive and ran. Jack flung open the back door. The cold hit him like a slap, hard and sharp. Snow had begun to fall, fine, quiet, dangerous. Ranger bolted out first, silent as a shadow. Jack and Lauren followed, ducking behind the old root cellar as movement flared at the side of the house. 3 figures, all black, no voices, no hesitation. "Ridge's guys?" Lauren whispered. Jack shook his head. Too clean. Too quiet. One of them moved toward the shed. The other 2 circled. Then Jack realized they weren't here for the people. They were here for Ranger. The realization landed in his gut like ice. "When they couldn't scare the man," he said, voice raw, "they came for the dog." Ranger was smart, trained, a survivor. But even the best K9 units didn't stand a chance against a tranquilizer from 50 feet. Jack lifted the rifle, took aim toward the shed. One of the figures raised something that gleamed under the moon. Lauren ducked, shielding the drive. Pop, not a gunshot. but the sound of pressurized gas. Jack didn't wait. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The bullet zipped past the intruder's arm. The figure dove behind the shed wall, vanishing like smoke. Ranger circled wide behind the trees, flanking the intruders. Lauren moved to the truck. "We have to go, now!" Jack fired once more, just to scatter them, then sprinted for the driver's side. Ranger darted across the yard like a ghost, leapt through the open door behind them as Jack floored the gas. Gravel sprayed. Headlights cut through snow. In the mirror, no one chased them. But that wasn't comfort. That was calculation. They didn't speak for a long time. Lauren drove. Jack sat in the passenger seat, rifle in his lap, staring out at the ghost town roads of cold water. Ranger panted beside him, paw still trembling from the burst of adrenaline. The dog rested his head on Jack's knee, eyes wide open, tracking every shadow outside the window. "They came into the yard," Lauren said finally. Jack nodded. They knew the layout, knew where to hit, probably been watching for weeks. They weren't trying to kill anyone. No, they were trying to take him. Jack's jaw clenched. And they almost did. Ranger whined softly, as if in response. Lauren swallowed hard. "What now?" "We go somewhere they don't control. That doesn't exist." "Yes, it does," Jack said. "The Grady farm, West Ridge. It's been abandoned since the fires last year. And if they follow us, they'll have to come through open land." Lauren didn't argue. She just drove. The Grady property sat on 24 wind-swept acres of overgrown prairie and charred fence posts. The barn had partially collapsed. The farmhouse was scorched, but intact enough for shelter. Jack cleared a room, barricaded the door, set a trap with a bell and tripwire. Lauren worked on uploading every document onto a private cloud. Ranger stayed between them, body curled in a tight ball, ears still twitching. "I used to think they'd never come this far," Jack said, staring at the wall. "Not for me. Not for a house. Not even for my dad's secrets." Lauren looked over. "But they didn't come for the house." He nodded. "They came for what it represents." She paused. "What he represents?" Jack looked at Ranger. "The dog's not just a companion," Lauren said. "He's a witness." "A legacy," Jack added. By morning, the snow had thickened. The roads were almost invisible under a white sheet. They'd be safe for a few hours, maybe. Lauren pressed send on the final upload. "It's out there now," she said. Jack looked at the drive in her hand. "Where's the backup?" "In my sock." He half smiled, then looked out the window. "We can't stay here long." Lauren nodded. "We make it to Denver, get to my editor, and get this into every major outlet. Local news, national channels, hell, even public access. Flood them." "And after that?" She didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. There was no after, not in the way they wanted. That evening, as the sky dimmed and the wind cut sharper, a small truck pulled up at the bottom of the hill. Jack raised the binoculars. "Friend or Ridge?" Lauren took a look, then smiled. "Neither." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Avery Hart." Lauren grinned. "Freelancer, shoots photos for exposés, used to date my sister, knows how to disappear." Jack looked again. Avery stepped out of the truck wearing a parka and combat boots, holding 2 duffel bags and a camera case. "Guess the cavalry's here," Jack muttered. Ranger barked once, short and low, welcoming. They pulled Avery into the main room, set her up with coffee, and handed over a portion of the files to photograph. She whistled low after skimming a few. "This is going to bury Ridge," she said. Jack shook his head. "It's going to expose him." "Burying comes later." Avery glanced at Ranger. "I heard about what happened last night." Jack said nothing. "You should know," she added. "There's chatter. On the encrypted channels. Ridge's people aren't just covering tracks, they're mobilizing. Lauren asked. For what? Avery hesitated. For something public. Something that makes you look like the villain. Jack exhaled slowly. Discredit first, then disappear us. They won't get that chance, Lauren said. Ranger sat up, ears perked. Jack looked at him. We don't run anymore. He turned back to Avery. We go on the record, all three of us. Photos, testimony, everything. Tonight. Avery opened her case. Then let's make it count. That night, they lit the old fireplace in the farmhouse. Jack sat beside Ranger. Lauren read over her statement again and again. Avery set the timer on her camera and adjusted the lighting. Then she raised the lens. Ready? She asked. Jack nodded. Ranger didn't move. The flash popped. For a moment, the whole room burned with light. Not just light, truth, the kind you couldn't bury anymore. Dead men don't confess, but sometimes they forget to lock the last door. It started with a burned letter. Jack found it the next morning, wedged between the last pages of his father's field journal, pages they hadn't gotten to yet in the chaos. The envelope was half crisped at the edges, like someone had tried to torch it, but gave up halfway. Inside, a single sheet of watermarked stationery, barely legible, but what Jack could read chilled him. CR. Doesn't keep everything at City Hall. The real vault is in the Ridge cabin. You'll need the dog. No signature, just a smudge of ink at the bottom, like someone had pressed their thumb there in haste, or guilt. He turned the paper toward Lauren. You think it's legit? She asked. Jack stared at the smudged thumbprint. It's my dad's writing. He knew he wouldn't make it out clean. He left us the last breadcrumb. Lauren looked skeptical. So Ridge has a private cabin, off the books? Probably in the woods north of his estate. Family land. Nobody but him touches it. She arched a brow. And we need the dog to get in. Jack nodded. That's what it says. Ranger looked up at the word. Jack's voice had changed, sharpened. The dog stood without being asked. They packed light, flashlights, maps, 2 weapons, and a spare drive in Lauren's coat lining. Avery stayed behind to monitor their cloud uploads and wait for word from her press contact in Denver. You're sure about this? She asked. Jack zipped his jacket. This isn't about sure. It's about done. Lauren gave Avery the sat phone. If we're not back in 6 hours, publish everything. Bypass the editor. Avery nodded. Got it. Stay sharp. The woods were older than Coldwater. Pine and fir, thick enough to strangle light. Snow clung to branches like fragile ash. Jack moved first, Ranger ahead of him by 5 yards, always circling, pausing, sniffing. Lauren kept to the rear, cross-checking terrain with satellite maps. They found the path after an hour. Not a trail exactly, just a line of absence in the snow, faint depressions. Recent. Someone's been out here, Lauren murmured. Jack followed the tracks. They ended at a rise in the land where a flat black cabin sat under the trees like a crouched animal. No smoke from the chimney, no vehicle, no mailbox, just silence, and a front door with a keypad. Jack exhaled. Dead men don't confess, but sometimes they forget to lock the last door. He turned to Ranger. Smell anything? Ranger approached the door slowly, sniffed, then looked back. Tail up. Clear. Lauren stepped up beside the keypad. We guessing? No, Jack said, pulling a small metal device from his coat pocket. We're listening. He clipped the code grabber onto the pad, activated it. The screen flickered. 4 digits. 1 beep, then the lock released. The inside of the cabin was cold but clean. No dust, no cobwebs, no smell of rot. It wasn't abandoned, it was maintained. Lauren swept her light along the walls, rows of shelves, steel cabinets, and boxes marked only with numbers. It looked less like a cabin and more like a holding site. A vault without alarms. Jack approached the back wall. There, tucked behind a bookshelf on a sliding track, was a small trap door in the floor. Ranger stood above it, paw tapping once. Beneath the door, they found stairs, stone, narrow, descending into a space cut into the earth. Lauren whispered, "This isn't a cabin. It's a bunker." The stairs opened into a single room, concrete walls, one bulb overhead, and a table in the center, metal, military, cold, files stacked in rows, ledgers, receipts, surveillance photos. Lauren picked up one and froze. It was a photo of her, from last week, outside the diner, mid-conversation with Jack. A Ranger at her feet, date stamped in the corner. Jack opened another folder, property transactions, names of families long gone, margins filled with notes, pressured, resisted, resolved. Next folder, transcripts, phone calls, conversations recorded. Some of them, his father's voice. His hands trembled slightly. Lauren opened a locked drawer with a hairpin. Inside, a small black notebook, leather-bound, initials CR, embossed in faded gold. She flipped through it. Confessions, real ones, written like insurance, like secrets Ridge didn't dare share, but couldn't afford to forget. Lauren read aloud. Hartman family, 08, forced easement, retaliation risk, low, sheriff silenced with campaign funds, deed destroyed. Her voice cracked. He wrote it all down. Jack's eyes darkened. He thought he was untouchable. Ranger growled. Jack turned. At the top of the stairs, footsteps. Someone else was here. They moved fast. Files stuffed into duffels. Drive slammed into Jack's coat. Lauren snapped photos of every document they couldn't carry. Ranger positioned by the stairwell, head low, ready. The footsteps paused, then retreated. Lauren whispered, "Decoy? Trap?" Jack shook his head. "Warning." They exited the cabin at full speed, not bothering to cover their tracks. But what stopped them in their tracks wasn't pursuit. It was what they saw just 20 yards from the tree line. A grave. Fresh dirt. Cross made from 2 sticks. Something handwritten on the wood. Lauren stepped closer, breath caught. Jack read the words. "I told the truth. It didn't matter. No name. Just silence." Ranger whined. Soft. Almost mournful. Jack looked at Lauren. "We need to go. Now." They didn't look back. Back at the Grady farm, Avery met them on the porch. "You need to hear this," she said, pale. She handed over the sat phone. The voice on the other end belonged to a federal contact Lauren had trusted years ago. "Denver just got hit with an injunction," the voice said. "Ridge's lawyers are claiming the files were manufactured. Judges are leaning his way. He's prepping a press statement to discredit everything before it goes live." Jack's chest tightened. "They're going to flip it," Lauren said. "Make us the criminals." Jack looked down at Ranger, then back at the photo of the grave. "No," he said. "Not this time." Lauren asked, "What do we do?" Jack looked at Avery. "We burn the fuse." She tilted her head. "How?" Jack lifted the black notebook. "We go to Ridge's house." Lauren blinked. "Tonight?" "We don't wait anymore." He handed her the book. "We bring the truth to his doorstep." "You spend your whole life hunting ghosts until one knocks on your door and says your name." The Ridge estate didn't look like the lair of a man haunted by secrets. It looked like money, old and arrogant. Wrought iron gate, stone walls. A curved driveway that wrapped around a fountain shaped like an eagle mid-hunt. The mansion sat beyond, its silhouette sharp against the early night, every window glowing warm and inviting. But Jack knew better. He knew the warmth was for show. The danger lived in the shadows behind it. They parked 2 blocks away, walked the rest of the distance under the cover of bare trees and drifting snow. Ranger padded silently ahead, his movements like smoke, fluid, invisible. Lauren carried a shoulder bag full of hard drives and the black notebook. Jack carried the .308 rifle strapped under his coat and something colder in his chest. They reached the edge of the property line. Avery's voice crackled through the earpiece. Security perimeter looks tight. Infrared sensors on the north fence. 2 rovers on a loop. You've got about a 5-minute window if you move when the lights cycle. Copy that, Jack said. Lauren looked over. We sure about this? No, Jack answered. But we're past the point of caution, she exhaled. Okay, let's haunt him. Jack checked his watch. On my mark. 3, 2, 1. They moved. They cleared the fence just as the yard lights dimmed for their programmed reset. Ranger led the way, nose low, body alert. They reached the back of the house. A servant entrance, steel reinforced, keycard access. Jack slid a duplicate Ridge access card, lifted from the bunker, and the door clicked open like it had been waiting for him. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Lauren whispered, Feels like a trap. It is, Jack said, but not for us. They moved through a corridor lined with polished family portraits. Ridge in various stages of public triumph. Ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, charity galas, all smiles, all masks. But Jack wasn't here for the surface. He was here for the vault. They descended a narrow stairwell past the wine cellar, deeper into the bones of the house. Ranger growled once at the bottom, low, uncertain. Jack placed a hand on his neck. We're close. Behind a concealed panel in the far wall, they found it. A vault door, keypad and retinal scan. Lauren pulled out a compact biometric bypass device, courtesy of Avery's contact in Denver. I've only got 1 shot at this, she warned. Jack nodded. Then make it count. She slid the device onto the panel, waited. The light turned green. The door hissed open. Inside, racks of locked drawers, digital servers, stacks of evidence more explosive than anything they had already uncovered. Documents marked confidential, files labeled with names of judges, council members, landowners, blackmail, bribes, surveillance, decades worth. And in the center of it all, a desk with one lone object, a framed photo of Jack's father and Ridge standing together, smiling. Jack's breath caught. He walked to the desk and picked it up. Lauren came beside him. You okay? No, he said. But I understand now. Ridge hadn't just been his father's enemy. He had once been his friend, and that betrayal had made it personal. Jack reached into his coat, pulled out the black notebook, and placed it beside the photo. Let's burn it all. Lauren began scanning the vault with her camera while Jack pulled files. Ranger stood near the entrance, unmoving. Then suddenly he stiffened, ears sharp. Jack followed his gaze. Footsteps. From the stairwell. They didn't have time to hide, didn't need to. Jack stepped into the doorway just as the figure rounded the corner. Calvin Ridge, still dressed in a tailored black coat, scarf loose around his neck, white hair combed, calm as ever. Well, Ridge said, you found it. Jack didn't raise the rifle, not yet. You kept a record of every sin, Jack said. Why? Ridge tilted his head. Legacy. You wouldn't understand. I understand just fine, Jack said. You wanted to control the narrative. Even after death, Ridge smiled faintly. Control is how you survive in a town like this. Your father thought truth would protect him, but the truth is a weapon, nothing more. Lauren stepped out beside Jack. Then I hope you like being disarmed. Ridge's gaze flicked to her, then to the camera, to the files on the floor. You won't make it out of here, he said softly. Jack raised the rifle. We already did, but Ridge didn't flinch. You think people will care? You think after all this they'll rise up? Coldwater doesn't want to be saved, it wants to forget. That's what you never understood. Jack stepped closer. You spent your whole life hunting ghosts until one knocked on your door and said your name. Ridge's expression hardened. He turned to Ranger. You're not his first dog, are you? Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. Ridge smiled again. But you'll bury him the same. Then, a distant thud from upstairs. Avery's voice cut through Jack's earpiece. Jack, get out now. You've got incoming. 3 SUVs just pulled up. Tactical formation. They're not cops. Ridge stepped backward into the vault. Too late, he said. Then he slammed his hand against a hidden switch. Steel shutters dropped over every window. Lockdown. Lauren screamed, We're sealed in! Jack fired, but Ridge had already vanished down a second corridor, hidden in the vault's rear. They chased. The hallway split. Dead ends. Maze-like design. Lauren cursed. He built this to trap people. Jack turned to Ranger. Find him. The dog hesitated, then bolted right. Jack followed. They reached a narrow side room lined with server towers, empty, but the terminal was still unlocked. Lauren plugged in her flash drive. Even if we're stuck, we take it with us. Jack stood watch. Ranger paced the doorway, ears back, sensing the closing pressure of time. Finally, the download completed. Lauren pulled the drive, then an explosion from upstairs. Smoke filtered down the stairwell. Avery shouted over the comms, They're breaching! You've got 2 minutes! Jack looked at the desk. One last file, unmarked. He grabbed it. They sprinted toward the entrance. Jack fired at the steel door's release mechanism. Sparks flew. It jammed, then gave. They burst into the cold night. Gunfire cracked behind them. Ranger barked. Lauren ducked behind the fountain, returning fire with Jack. Then Avery's truck screeched around the corner. Go! Go! She shouted. They dove in. Ranger last. The truck peeled out as bullets snapped off the Stone Eagle's wings. Safe. For now. Breathing hard. Heartbeats like war drums. Jack opened the last file. Inside, a birth certificate. Lauren leaned over. It wasn't Ridge's, it was his own. But the father's name. Blank. Jack stared, and everything inside him shifted. You don't inherit truth. You dig it up, bone by bone, lie by lie. The file wouldn't stop shaking in Jack's hands. Not because the truck was rattling along the frozen back roads outside Coldwater, or because of the adrenaline still coursing through him, but because of what he'd read. His birth certificate, yes, but not the usual one. This wasn't the version his mom had shown him as a kid, with both parents' names neatly printed. This one had only his mother's, and under father, a blank space. Lauren sat beside him in the back seat, her breath fogging up the window. She hadn't said a word since he opened the file. Ranger rested his head on Jack's boot, ears twitching every few seconds. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was loaded. What does it mean? Lauren finally asked. Jack didn't look up. It means the man I buried may not have been my father. Avery, driving, glanced back in the mirror. Could be a clerical error. No, Jack said. This copy came from Ridge's personal vault. It was stored in a file marked with a number that doesn't match any town record. That's not an accident. It's a message. Lauren leaned forward. From Ridge? Jack shook his head. No. From my father, or whoever he was to me. He left it where Ridge could never publish it, but also never destroy it. Hidden in plain sight. Avery exhaled. You think Ridge knows? I think Ridge knew everything. They made it back to the Grady farm just before dawn. The storm had eased, but not the pressure in Jack's chest. He laid out the documents on the dining table and stared at them like they might rearrange themselves into something sane. The forged deeds, the black notebook, the grave photograph, the blank birth certificate. All of it told a story, but not a complete one. Not yet. Lauren brought him coffee. He didn't touch it. Maybe your mother... She died before she could explain, Jack said, sharper than he meant to. He rubbed his eyes. She always said he was a good man, that he fought for what was right. But maybe she meant someone else. Lauren sat beside him. Maybe she meant both. That stopped him. Jack looked up. What do you mean? She could have loved two truths at once. Maybe the man who raised you was the one who protected you. Maybe the man who made you was someone else entirely. Jack's throat tightened. Then who the hell was I really fighting for this whole time? Ranger whined, low and close. Jack reached down, touched the dog's neck, grounding himself. Avery cleared her throat. There's something else. In the metadata from that final download, there's a folder labeled Blood Ledger. It's encrypted. Deep. Lauren perked up. What kind of encryption? Military grade, but homebrew. That notebook Ridge kept. It might have the cipher key. Jack grabbed it, started flipping. Halfway through, tucked between 2 pages detailing payouts to land inspectors, was a hand-drawn grid, letters and numbers. Nonsense to most, but not to Lauren. This is a Visionaire cipher, she said. Old school, but effective if paired with a randomized key. Avery handed over the drive. Be my guest. Lauren plugged in her laptop and started typing. Jack paced the room. Ranger followed, step for step. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then, I'm in, Lauren said, voice hushed. Jack stopped. Lauren stared at the screen. Oh my God! The Blood Ledger wasn't about property. It was about people. Children, specifically. Unregistered births, custody handoffs, quiet adoptions, money trails tied to Coldwater's elite, judges, business owners, sheriffs. Lauren kept scrolling. One name appeared over and over. Whitaker. Jack leaned in. Under his own name was a secondary code, subject 14B, Guardian assignment approved. Beside that, a series of initials, CR. Ridge, Lauren whispered. Jack's stomach turned. I wasn't just raised by the wrong man, he said. I was assigned to him. Avery looked sick. You were part of some experiment? Not a lab experiment, Jack said slowly. A loyalty program. They placed kids with men they could control, veterans, former lawmen, people with debt. Raise the next generation to follow orders. And your dog? Lauren asked. Jack looked down at Ranger. There was a file. Canine Unit R19. Companion to Subject 14B. Primary purpose, behavioral reinforcement. Jack's breath caught. You were trained for me. Ranger tilted his head, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Then he pressed his body into Jack's side. Not a soldier's move, a companion's, a friend's. Lauren said quietly, They didn't expect you to wake up. No, Jack said, voice low. They expected me to carry the torch. The sun was up now. The light through the frost-covered windows felt foreign, like it didn't belong in the same world as the truth they'd just uncovered. Jack gathered the files. All of this, he said, goes public. No more waiting. No more back channels. Lauren hesitated. Even the parts about you? Especially those. She nodded. We'll need more than documents. A face, a voice, someone who saw it happen. Avery was already pulling up names. There's a woman, Margaret Henson, used to run the Coldwater County Health Department, disappeared in '99. Rumor was she had a breakdown. Where is she now? Jack asked. She resurfaced in Montana last year, lives off-grid, but I know someone who knows her. Jack stood. Then we go to her. Avery frowned. If she's alive and hiding, there's a reason. Jack nodded. Exactly. Which means she's the final piece. Lauren looked at him. What if she confirms it? That everything you thought about your family, your father, even Ranger, was just part of their plan? Jack turned to the window. The snow had started falling again. He didn't blink. Then I burned the plan to the ground. Some ghosts don't haunt houses. They haunt choices. The road to the Bitterroot Mountains was a winding, lonely stretch of ice and silence. Pine trees framed either side like sentries, tall and unmoving. The farther they drove, the more the snow seemed to fall sideways, like it had given up trying to reach the ground and instead decided to cling to everything it touched. Margaret Henson lived past the power lines, no town, no neighbors, no way to call for help, which made her the kind of person who either had something to hide or something worth protecting. Jack watched the tree line roll by, the cold seeping into the seams of the truck. Ranger's head was on his knee again, breathing slow but alert. Lauren sat in the back, tapping out encrypted messages to their remaining contacts. Avery drove, her camera case between her feet, one eye on the mirror. They weren't being followed. Not yet. But Jack had stopped trusting peace and quiet a long time ago. We're close, Avery said, checking the GPS. 1/2 mile up, then a trail. After that, it's on foot. Jack nodded. Let's make this fast. He didn't say what they were all thinking. She might not want to be found. They parked beside a dead tree with a red ribbon tied around its trunk. A signal, according to Avery's source. The only kind Margaret left for people she might still trust. They hiked through dense snow for 20 minutes before they saw the cabin. It wasn't much, just a sloped roof buried under frost, a chimney that hadn't smoked in days, and a porch that looked like it might collapse if you breathed too hard on it. But it was there. And it was real. Ranger stopped 10 feet from the porch and growled, "Not danger, warning." Jack raised a hand. "She's watching us." Lauren turned in a slow circle. "Where?" "Everywhere," Jack said, then raised his voice. "Margaret Henson, my name is Jack Whitaker. I have the blood ledger. We need to talk." For a long second, nothing. Then a voice, older, tired, but sharp, cut through the trees. "You brought a dog." Jack turned. Margaret stepped out from the shadows of the woods, a rifle in her hands but not raised. Her coat was patched, her face lined, and her eyes, those eyes were still fire. "A dog, a camera, and a lie," she said. Jack met her gaze. No lies, just questions. Margaret looked at Ranger, then at Jack. "I knew your mother," she said. Jack froze. Margaret stepped onto the porch. "I knew what they did to her, what they tried to do to you. Come in." The inside of the cabin was surprisingly warm. Wood stove humming, tea kettle steaming. They sat around a scarred table. No small talk, no pleasantries. Margaret placed a photo in front of Jack, a younger version of his mother, smiling, holding a baby. "You," Margaret said, "were born into a program called Second Line. Ridge funded it after the Coldwater Land Acts failed, quietly, privately. They wanted to rebuild Coldwater from the inside, raise a generation that would never question authority, clean slates, controlled loyalties." Jack stared at the photo. "My father was chosen, not because of who he was, but because of what he'd lost. They targeted veterans, men who were broken enough to be molded. They gave them a mission and children to raise." Jack's fists clenched. "He loved me." "I'm not saying he didn't," Margaret said. "Some of them did. But love wasn't part of the design. It was a side effect. Lauren leaned forward. "Why are you still alive?" Margaret sipped her tea. "Because I ran. When I found out what Ridge was doing, when I saw the falsified birth records, the hush money, the vanishing mothers, I tried to go public. And I was discredited, labeled unstable, removed. By the time I knew who to trust, it was too late. Ridge buried the program deeper. Everyone who resisted vanished." Avery flipped through her notes. "Then why keep the name second line? Why not erase everything?" Margaret gave a sad smile. "Because men like Ridge love monuments, even if they're built on bones." Jack pulled out the black notebook, the cipher, the files. Margaret looked at them with shaking hands. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." "We do," Jack said. "That's why we're here." She turned to him. "You were always the variable, the one they watched closest, the one your father protected too well." "I wasn't part of their plan," Jack said. "No," Margaret agreed. "You were the crack in it." He nodded slowly. "Then it's time to break it open." Before they left, Margaret handed him a worn envelope. Inside, a tape. Real tape. Cassette. Labeled simply, "Testimony, 1997. "My insurance," she said. "Never digitized." "Ridge's men never found it." Jack tucked it into his coat, then paused. "You said you knew my mother." Margaret nodded. Jack's voice broke slightly. "Did she know about the program? About me?" Margaret's answer was soft. "She knew enough, but she chose you anyway." Jack swallowed hard. Lauren touched his hand under the table. Margaret stood. "You should go. Ridge won't retreat now. He'll go nuclear." "Let him," Jack said. Margaret turned to Avery. "If this gets out, the town will burn." Avery's voice was steady. "Then we give them the match." They hiked back in silence, the wind beginning to howl. Ranger stopped once to sniff the air. Something shifted in Jack. A weight that had been stuck behind his ribs now began to move. "You don't inherit truth," he said aloud. "You dig it up, bone by bone, lie by lie." Lauren looked at him. "Then let's dig." That night, in the truck under a sky full of bitter stars, Jack played the tape. His mother's voice came through the static. "If you're hearing this, you found something they never wanted you to. That means you're braver than me. Or maybe just more stubborn. Either way, Jack, this was never your fault. Not your blood, not your burden, but I know you'll carry it anyway, because that's who you are." He didn't speak. Couldn't. Ranger leaned against him. Lauren wiped her eyes in the dark. Then, from the tape, another voice. "Ridge. What matters is control. If you can't inherit loyalty, you manufacture it. If they won't obey, you make sure they don't exist." Jack turned it off. His voice was ice. "We take this to the courthouse. Tomorrow." Lauren nodded. "Full exposure?" "All of it." Avery checked her camera battery. "They'll come hard." Jack looked out at the woods. "Then we hit harder. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to set the truth on fire." The Coldwater Courthouse stood like a tomb in the center of town. Grey stone, hollow halls, and a silence so deep it made every footstep sound like a warning. Jack had always hated the place, even before he knew why. Now he knew. It wasn't just a courthouse, it was a mausoleum of secrets, the heart of Ridge's empire, and today Jack was going to crack it open. They arrived just before noon, Avery in the lead, camera strapped to her chest. Lauren beside her, carrying the encrypted drive and Margaret's tape. Jack brought the notebook and the birth certificate and the blood ledger. But mostly, he brought a reckoning. Outside, a light crowd had already gathered. Reporters, townspeople, city workers. Word had spread faster than they expected. Avery leaned over to Jack. "We either control the narrative now, or it controls us forever." He gave a tight nod. "Let's begin." They entered the courthouse and headed straight for the clerk's office. Inside, a woman behind the counter, grey hair, frown lines, and eyes like steel. She looked up as they entered. "You can't be in here without—" Jack placed the folder on the counter. "This is a public records request," he said, "and a formal submission of criminal evidence." She hesitated. Lauren slid the drive toward her. "You'll want to log this." Avery was already recording. Outside the office, footsteps echoed, boots fast, heavy. Jack turned. 4 men in dark coats were moving down the hallway toward them. Not cops. Security. Private. Ridge's men. He felt his pulse quicken. "Lauren," he muttered. "Now." She pulled out a flash drive and shoved it into the public records terminal at the edge of the room. The screen flickered. A backup file opened, then another. Documents filled the screen, scanned evidence, official seals, signatures. And at the top, the blood ledger, unsealed. It began auto-uploading to Coldwater's municipal server, and the terminal was live. Everyone in the building could see it. The courthouse PA system kicked on with a soft crackle. Then, Margaret's voice, grainy and tired, filled the building. "They took our names. They took our children. They turned our town into a farm for loyalty and silence. But you can't silence the dead." Gasps from the hallway. The men in coats froze, suddenly unsure. Avery turned her camera on them. "Smile, gentlemen. You're about to be famous." 20 minutes later, it was chaos. Reporters were swarming the courthouse steps. Margaret's full recording now played on every monitor in the clerk's office. The mayor had been seen leaving the back of City Hall. 3 judges had gone unavailable, and Calvin Ridge nowhere to be found. Jack stood on the steps, looking over a town that didn't know whether to be afraid, angry, or relieved. Probably all 3. Lauren came to his side. "You did it." "No," Jack said. "We did it. But it's not over." Avery joined them. "Police chief just issued a statement. Says he's launching an internal investigation. That's code for 'we're panicking.'" Jack didn't smile. Ridge hadn't surfaced yet, which meant he was planning something. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. Lauren turned. A black town car pulled up across the square. Door opened. Ridge stepped out. No coat, no guards, just calm. He walked up the courthouse steps like it was any other day. The crowd split. Jack's chest tightened. Ridge stopped 5 feet from him. "You made a mess, Jack," Ridge said, almost kindly. "No," Jack replied. "You made it. I just lit the fuse." Ridge looked past him, toward the camera crews, the civilians, the chaos. Then he said it. "You don't get to burn it all down and walk away. You want truth? Fine. Let's go all the way." Jack frowned. "What are you talking about?" Ridge pulled a folder from his coat, held it out. Jack didn't take it, so Ridge dropped it at his feet. "Read it, then ask yourself if the truth still matters." And he walked away. They opened the folder that night. Inside, photos, notes, a transcript, a single sheet marked Operation Second Line, Final Stage, Asset Reclamation. It was dated 3 weeks ago. Ridge hadn't been preserving the past. He had been preparing to restart it. And the subject, Jack. Ranger stood suddenly from his place by the fire, growling, low, danger close. Lauren grabbed her bag. Avery shut off the lights, and outside, in the shadows of the Grady farm, 3 vehicles pulled up. No headlights, no markings. Jack looked down at the file, then at Ranger, then at the women who'd stood beside him every step. "Sometimes the only way to be heard," he said, loading a fresh clip into his rifle, "is to set the truth on fire." Lauren nodded. "Then let's make it loud." The first shot cracked through the night, like a bone breaking clean. Jack was already moving before the echo faded, yanking Lauren down behind the overturned dining table, Avery diving behind the couch. Ranger stayed low, but alert, muscles coiled tight. Outside, the engines of the unmarked vehicles idled like wolves waiting to pounce. A second shot shattered the front window. Glass rained across the living room. Jack returned fire, quick and controlled, sending 3 rounds into the darkness. Someone shouted. Tires crunched on frozen gravel. Then silence. "They're flanking!" Avery shouted from the floor. Jack looked to Lauren. She was already digging into her bag, pulling out a handheld radio and a small metal device the size of a deck of cards. "EMP spike," she said, panting. "Range is short, but it'll kill their comms and maybe stall their vehicles." "How short?" Jack asked. 30 feet. "You'll need to get closer," Avery said. Lauren nodded. "I'll do it," Jack said, but she grabbed his arm. "No, this started because of you. Let me help finish it." There was no time to argue. She dashed out the back, silent as shadow. Ranger followed. Jack and Avery covered her through the windows, suppressing fire until they saw the blue flash, bright and sudden, like lightning kissing the ground. Then came the chaos. Yelling, doors slamming. One of the SUVs sparked and hissed, smoke curling up from under the hood. And in that moment, Jack ran, straight into the dark. He found Ridge standing in the middle of the field behind the Grady house, flanked by 2 guards. One held a rifle, the other was mid-radio when the EMP dropped. Ridge didn't look surprised. He looked tired. "You came," Ridge said, voice calm even now. Jack raised his gun. "You sent mercs to kill us. What did you think I'd do?" "I told them to retrieve," Ridge said, "not eliminate. You're valuable, Jack." "You don't own me," Jack snapped. "No," Ridge said, "but I made you." Jack stepped closer. "No, you used me, like a blueprint, like a tool. And yet here you are, smart, trained, loyal, just not to me." Jack's finger hovered over the trigger. "You created monsters, told men to raise children like weapons. That ends tonight." Ridge didn't flinch. "You think exposing this will fix anything? Cold water will bury it, just like they always have." "They can't," Jack said, "because this time, I'm not the only one shouting." Behind him, lights exploded across the field, cameras, dozens, people emerging from the woods, reporters, activists, old Cold Water families. Avery had sent the call, and they'd answered. Ridge turned slowly, watching the crowd swell behind Jack. He let out a long breath. "History's written by survivors, Jack. Are you sure you want to be a martyr?" Jack stepped forward. "No, I want to be a witness." The standoff ended with Ridge in cuffs. Lauren returned from the tree line with Ranger at her side, face bruised but burning with adrenaline. Federal agents, finally tipped off by the data Avery had distributed, swept in by dawn. What they found wasn't just one vault of evidence, but 4, across multiple properties, multiple states. It turned out Ridge had been running more than loyalty programs. He'd built an empire of shadows, and Jack, he'd just set the sun on it. Weeks later, Coldwater looked different. Not better, but awake. The courthouse was under review. The mayor resigned. The local paper, once owned by Ridge's holding company, ran Jack's story on the front page with a single headline, "The Blood That Built Us." Below it, a photo. Jack and Ranger walking down Main Street. No weapons, just resolve. Margaret Henson came out of hiding. She testified, others followed, and slowly, painfully, Coldwater began to face its truth. Not erase it, not justify it, but face it. Jack didn't stay. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want speeches or plaques or schools named after him. He just wanted to breathe. So he packed a bag, loaded Ranger into the passenger seat of an old Ford pickup, and drove west. Lauren hugged him at the edge of town. Avery punched his shoulder hard enough to bruise. "You ever go dark on us," she warned, "we're finding you." Jack smiled. "You're my backup, always." "Damn right." Ranger barked once in agreement. Then they were gone. The road ahead was long, empty, but not lonely. Ranger's head hung out the window, ears flapping in the wind, nose twitching with every scent. Jack glanced over at him. "You know," he said, "you were supposed to make me obedient." Ranger gave a soft grunt. Jack laughed. "Guess we both broke the mold." He looked ahead again. Miles of highway curling into unknown places, and still the words of his mother echoed. "This was never your fault, not your blood, not your burden. But I know you'll carry it anyway." And he had. But now he was putting it down, not to forget, not to move on, but to finally live. Because some stories don't end in fire or vengeance. They end with freedom, and the choice to walk forward, even if the past still follows like a shadow, even if the ghosts never leave, because in the end, the truth wasn't buried in cold water, it was cold water. And Jack, he unearthed it, piece by piece, lie by lie, until all that remained was the man who survived it, and the dog who never left his side.